Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Today, our topic is chronic stress in the adrenal system. Today, I'll be talking about how to understand what goes wrong with the adrenal system in chronic disease, not quite medical disease. We're not talking about tumors of the brain or tumors of the adrenal glands. We're talking about functional lesions or functional difficulties, or rather, what we would call dysfunctions. We will also be talking about assessment methods and treatment methods that are alternative. I think you'll enjoy it. The first topic that we'll be talking about, I think, is one that comes up a lot, and it is nervous breakdown. When I was growing up, there was this thing that was kind of whispered about called the nervous breakdown. And the nervous breakdown was this kind of nebulous idea that you could kind of fall apart and you would have symptoms that were strange. And they might include not being able to stand up, not being able to walk around, having to be bedridden, laying down flat, having rapid pulse, almost like a panic attack or anxiety attack, being unable to handle your environment, being unable to go to work or take care of your family, being clearly unable to drive and operate heavy equipment. Often the person would have loose bowels or uncontrolled bowels, not always. And it was really strange because nobody ever really knew what it was. It was just kind of this thing that we whispered about. But nervous breakdown essentially was the end stage of the collapse of the adrenal system for a lot of people. So that would look like you've gone through several phases that usually take years, although it could be a lot shorter than that if you've got an acute stressor, like you've been in war or you've just been through an abusive situation and a domestic situation. But the general idea is that most of the time this stuff takes a while. It takes a period of time for you to go through having a stressful event, reacting to it and reacting rather robustly and strongly, and then gradually being worn down. And as that happens, what happens first is people receive their stress and they respond with a big burst of cortisol, which is a hormone from your adrenal glands, and they make enough or extra. And that's kind of a compensatory reaction. The person is robust. They answer it with a very strong response. Sometimes friends of mine call this the executive syndrome. There are other executive syndromes, but this executive syndrome simply means that when you respond to stress, you respond to it with a real punch. You really get a strong response with higher blood pressure and maybe a red face and perhaps a pounding heart and better circulation and maybe even think a little bit better. It's almost like a shot of coffee. So as the stress goes on, you then begin to deplete your adrenal glands if it lasts for weeks and weeks or months and months or years and years. And there are different phases. Different laboratories break them down into different phases, anywhere from a few to a dozen. But that's not terribly important. What's important is that first cortisol goes very strong, and then over time cortisol goes down, and then DHEA goes up, and then it goes down, and then ultimately at the very end of the whole story, the gland is depleted and you end up with depleted DHEA, depleted cortisol, and you have kind of a flat line. What does that flat line mean? Well, it has to do with your daily diurnal rhythm, or your rhythm that takes place throughout a 24-hour period. You should have a high cortisol output from your adrenals in the morning, about 7, 8 a.m. And then it should drop and stay low for the rest of the day and the rest of the night. The purpose of that is a bunch of things, but the main purpose is to wake you up and to be able to mobilize blood sugar from your liver. The cortisol that peaks at 7 or 8 a.m. peaks because you've been fasting. You haven't been eating overnight, hopefully. And so if you've been sleeping 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, and you haven't eaten for at least that period of time, and most of us have had a lot longer time. Many of us even do intermittent fasting for maybe 16 hours. But the point is, you don't have any blood sugar circulating, or much blood sugar circulating, so you need a little bit more when you wake up because you're about to face the day and do more stuff. So you're going to secrete some cortisol from your adrenal glands. That's going to raise your blood pressure just a touch and allow you to face the day and be upright. And it's going to mobilize sugar from your liver and release it into the body and send it around to all the cells. if you don't get a nice, if you get a bunch of cortisol, you're going to have a big release of sugar, and then you're going to release a bunch of insulin, and then you're going to shove all that insulin into your fat cells. You're going to get fat, and you're going to then have depleted blood sugar and start all over again with low blood sugar. And then you'll be super hungry, maybe. Now, here's the rub. Sometimes with these problems, you don't get the hunger signal because cortisol and other stress responses tend to blunt our hunger response. So some people may be ravenously hungry and others may have their hunger system turned off. There are plenty of executives that I've worked for that have said to me, I don't feel hungry anymore. I just don't get that hunger signal. And that hunger signal of satiety is and response to needing food, the opposite of satiety, is fragile. And so if you're stressed out, you can lose that and you can be hypoglycemic or low blood sugar, but you don't feel hungry. So that can be very confusing. And sometimes it takes a family member or a friend or a doctor to tell you, hey, you're hypoglycemic. And then you know that you need to eat something, even though you're not hungry. You eat something and then you feel a little bit better. So these symptoms of these problems of the adrenal glands can vary from a very hyper response, meaning quite high cortisol and feeling like you're very stressed out and you're very aroused. And by that, I mean the total arousal of the body. We're not talking about, romantic arousal. We're talking about the whole body is just risen to a higher level of function. And sometimes that's quite uncomfortable. So you'll end up feeling terribly uncomfortable and feeling like you're over revved. Now, as time goes by, you might have bouts of inefficient production of cortisol where you feel kind of flatlined. And in fact, the urine and blood tests will show that there is a flatline diurnal rhythm of the circadian rhythm of cortisol, which is that 24-hour rhythm. When that happens, you're going to feel flat and you're going to feel like you can't respond. And that end stage, which can take weeks, months, or years, often feels like the nervous breakdown. It's the idea of, man, I just can't rise to the level of the challenges that I used to rise to. And often it happens with aging. People will hit kind of a slump in midlife sometimes, or they'll get burnout. It can happen to anyone of any age. It can happen at any time, but it tends to be more, later in life as people chronically expose themselves to these problems and they get deficiencies. Because another one of the problems that happens with adrenal overfiring is that when you secrete all these steroids into your bloodstream that you made, you're going to pee out your minerals. You're going to lose through your kidneys a lot of healthy electrolytes. So you're going to lose minerals and you're going to lose these cofactors because these minerals are the key to body chemistry. They're the key to brain chemistry and they're the key to organ chemistry and metabolism because the foundation of every vitamin and every enzyme and every system in your body, every gene that turns on, every SNP that turns on, all of them are dependent on minerals. So when you pee away all those minerals, and I'm not just talking about the big ones, I'm not just talking about sodium and potassium and magnesium and calcium. I'm talking about trace minerals, things like copper and things like, strontium and boron, things you don't think about or talk about very much. These are important, and there's some 60, 70, 80 of them that are not radioactive that we have to get in our bodies. This problem is something that can affect your sex hormones too, because as DHEA gets messed up, which is dehydroepiandrosterone, DHEA is one of the hormones that's a precursor. It's one of the cholesterol precursors that you make from cholesterol into your sex hormones and your stress hormones. So there's an intimate relationship between your stress hormones of your adrenal glands and the sex hormones. So you're going to have problems with DHEA being a dysregulator of a binding protein called sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG. That's a protein that we can measure in your blood. We don't measure that so much in urine, but we measure that in blood. All these other hormones can be measured in urine or saliva, but sex hormone binding globulin tends to be best measured in the blood because it's a protein. And it's a protein that bounds and carries these hormones all around your body. So you can end up with a problem where, you've got so much cortisol that you've got a problem where you can't make other hormones. You can't make sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen and progesterone, because you've got so much cortisol being made and being released. And you might get a depletion of DHEA. So one of the best things to do for this is to eat cholesterol, to eat fat, and to eat saturated fat, and to eat cholesterol, because it's very important to get cholesterol in your body. Now, we can make cholesterol out of plant and out of animal products, but there are some real difficulties. And I don't want you to think that plant sterols and plant fats are necessarily safer than animal fats. It's quite the opposite. If a person eats a whole lot of plant sterols, we find that they can be found in the plaque in your arteries. So it's not just animal fats, it's the fats that come from plants. And really the deposition of plaque in your arteries doesn't come from eating cholesterol. It comes from eating carbohydrates, especially the refined carbohydrates like high fructose corn sweetener is the killer. It is the main cause of most of the rapid heart disease and rapid weight gain that we see in children in the United States today. It comes from high fructose corn sweetener in their food and in their drinks and their beverages. You can have problems with your emotions. You can have PTSD that will fire this. You can be worried about something consciously or unconsciously. You can have poor sleep from chronic stress and PTSD and some issue that's unresolved. You could just have sleep issues that are not emotional related. They might be related to your diet or EMFs, electromagnetic fields that are around your bed, or having your phone too close to you. Having electromagnetic fields in your sleep can be a real problem. You need to turn those off and get those out of the way. And you need to test for them. In fact, I use a meter. This is one of many meters. These are about $700. You don't have to buy an expensive one, but this is the Safe Living meter. And by the way, I don't get kickbacks on any of the stuff I talk about, labs, equipment, or anything. So please just take a look at these. These are things I use in my office with my patients. Very interesting stuff. And I happen to use this one. There's many others out there. Mine is fairly expensive and fairly accurate, but you can test your home for stress and for electromagnetic stress, because that's a real problem on your body and your adrenal glands. There are a number of labs that are available, and what I'd like to do now is I'm going to share my screen with you and show you a lab test that you may or may not have seen before. This is a lab test that I use called Mosaic Diagnostics. They're in Kansas City, and they're run by William Shaw, who's a very famous toxicologist. It's just a wonderful laboratory. This is their website. It used to be called Great Plains Laboratory, and I've ordered from them over my 30-year career. They've been just one of the most amazing labs. And this example is a sample report of a hormone plus panel that they do with saliva. This one is saliva. And so this one is cortisol, AM, noon, evening, and night. And it shows a curve here. And you can see on the screen that the colors show what you should be. Ideally, if you're the most functional, your data collection at this point, this point, this point, and this point should all be in the green. So the curve should go down from left to right. This patient is flatlined in the morning and then rises in the afternoon. So they're quite the opposite, the diurnal rhythm that they should have. They wake up in the morning flatlined with no cortisol, no ability to mobilize sugar from their liver, and they probably can't face the day without coffee or caffeine, and it probably takes them a while to wake up. And they really don't face the morning very, very well. They're probably not fun to deal with, and they're probably not very happy in the morning. Likewise, in the nighttime, they have a high amount of cortisol. They're very aroused and very stressed out. They probably stress eat. They probably get difficulties with reactive hypoglycemia, where their blood sugar goes up and down, and they're going to get all kinds of cravings at nighttime because they've got massive amounts of this type of problem. So you can go through this, go to the website, take a look at the information. It shows you both cortisol and stress hormones here, and then it shows you on the next page the sex hormones, estrone, the three estrogens, and progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA. Very simple, very short report, very nice. So let me stop sharing that one, and I'm going to go to another one here. If I could share with you another lab. Just take me a second here. I want to show you the Dutch. This is the Dutch, which is another laboratory in the United States that I really love and I use a lot. This is a urine test. And as a urine test, what this one does is it measures the same kind of stuff, but it goes a little deeper. And this lab does these nice little graphics where they show these little dials. So for each hormone that they're expressing, they show a dial, and the dial shows, in this case, like E2 and progesterone and testosterone. So it's a nice little summary, because E2 is the most dominant of the female estrogens in both men and women, because we see it in males too, but it's about 1/10 the level in males that it is in females. And so you can see that the dial should be in the green zone between the stars. And this patient, this sample patient from the lab, is a 33-year-old female. And it says that their estrogen is low. It's below normal. It's the low range. And then the progesterone is right smack in the middle of the nice range, because the green arrow is within the green bars between the two stars. And then testosterone is super low, which is below the star, because it should be minimally here at this low star or this high star. And that's the normal range of distribution for healthy people from around the United States, according to this laboratory's methods. And they've got their collection times up here. So they show you when the collection was done. So you know it's at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 5 p.m., 10 p.m. They labeled the work. And then this must look familiar to you because this is the same kind of chart. It shows the diurnal rhythm of waking, morning, afternoon, and nighttime ranges. And it shows that there should be a range, that you should be bounded between the black lines. Your values should be bounded between the black lines if your adrenals are really healthy. Now, this is not a disease. We're not talking about a medical diagnosis. We're talking about a medical dysfunction in functional medicine that shows that when the person wakes, they're okay. They're between the black lines, and then they're okay here, and then they're okay here in the afternoon. They're okay at night. So their cortisol is quite good. Their sex hormones is quite bad, but their hormones are their cortisol stress hormones are quite good. So you'll see that some people have more of a dominant cortisol problem and hormone problem that is adrenal, but not so much sex hormones. And other people have an okay cortisol pattern, but their sex hormones are off. Now, I want to remind you that as we look through these, sometimes DHEA will be low and cortisol is okay. And that still shows a chronic stress. Now, this person is still within normal, but they're really at the bottom of the functional range. So I don't like that. Now, the neat thing about this laboratory is not only do they do DHEA production, but they also do something called DHEA sulfide. And we see that they show us two kinds of reporting. They show us the graphical reporting, which is this image that's kind of very right brain, that's very pictorial. And then they have a kind of a left brain explanation, which is the same data. And this is just a tabular form that looks like a spreadsheet. And this table shows all the numbers. So some people that like to read numbers can see flagged things that are within range, below range, out of range, above range, high end of normal, etc. And they can look at all those numbers. Now, this is a pictorial representation. It shows DHEA sulfide, which is a little more accurate. And yet again, DHEA sulfide is on the low side. So I would look at this person and say, man, while your cortisol is pretty good, or woman, I might say, while your cortisol was okay, your DHEA is creeping on the low side. So it looks like you've been under some chronic stress. It's not terrible, but your sex hormones are off. Your testosterone is low, and your and your progesterone's okay, but your estrogens are off. Now, at this point, we can look at the three estrogens. Remember earlier above, I said that E2 was the main estrogen that we were looking at, but there's actually three estrogens in humans. There's like 10 estrogens in horses, but there's 3 in humans. So we've got one here, E1, estrone, estradiol, di means 2, and triol means 3, estriol. And so we've got 1, 2, and 3. Number 1 is low, number 2 is low, and number 3 is normal. So we've got a difficulty of low hormones. The next thing that they show us is the breakdown products of some of these estrogens, and all molecules in the body break down. So when they break down, they fall apart, and they're supposed to be broken down and disposed of by the body. Well, one of the things that happens in the human body, especially in females, is that estrogen is broken down into some toxic chemicals. And the most toxic ones here are talked about that, if not detoxified, 4-hydroxyestrone can bind to and damage DNA. So this kind of tells you about your risk. Now, this person isn't terribly at risk because they've got pretty much low estrogen. So they're not going to make a lot of estrogens that would trigger breast cancers and other types of problems. So they don't have to worry so much about that particular problem in this case. Doesn't mean they're free of risk of female cancers. It just means that they're free of the estrogen one mostly. They would have a tendency toward less of that. There's also a methylation marker over here that helps us understand if the person is more over or under methylating. And this gives us an idea about some of the William Walsh work that you've heard me talk about, and the Yasko work that talks about methylation. And then it goes on to give a breakdown of the same things in a left brain format. Then here it shows you the melatonin. And it shows you that this person's melatonin is very high. It's at the upper end of normal, and that may or may not be a problem. Now, it tends to be that when cortisol is low, melatonin tends to be high. And when melatonin is low, cortisol tends to be high. So they tend to have a reciprocal relationship. Now, I told you that this person looked like they had a pretty good cortisol, but their melatonin was high. So if they've got any sleep problems, the last thing I'm going to do is give them more melatonin, because they've already got at the upper range of normal. So we would look for other causes of their sleep problem, like epinephrine. And there are some good lab tests for that. So as we go through here, We look at the metabolism of cortisone versus cortisol, which is the breakdown product. So I'm not going to go into further explanation. And then we have a mini organic acid test, which is an organic acid or oat test, which is more of a metabolic marker. And this is a bonus that they give, which is another kind of test that is kind of a mini oat. And it shows things like B12, B6, biotin, B vitamin markers, glutathione, a detoxification marker, a gut marker called Indican that looks at dysbiosis and leaky gut syndrome, some dopamine metabolites and norepinephrine metabolites. So here's where we look at norepinephrine and it says within range, but dopamine metabolite was low end of range. So we might look at this and talk to the person about dopamine symptoms. We also might look at the additional markers like melatonin and this very interesting one called oxidative stress, which is 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine, which is a mouthful. And that is a very good marker for oxidative stress. Now, you hear me talk a lot about oxidative stress because William Walsh has brought to the fore quite a lot of information about how bipolar disorder and a number of mental health issues are related to oxidative stress in the body and in the brain. So then they go on and have you many, many pages about what they can read about and how it works and how to interpret and all of that stuff. So it's a very useful one. Please visit that website and check it out. It's a great mosaic laboratory. Let me go back to my notes here. So what we've done is we've gone through a couple of labs that do saliva and urine. We also like to do hair testing, and we like to look at hair testing for heavy metals and for minerals to see what the chronic long-term exposure over about 4 months is, because hair is good for about 4 months of measurement, and it's really the best measure of chronic exposure to heavy metals. You can do urine and stool and blood for heavy metals, but they're not quite as accurate. If you have heavy metals showing out of range high in your blood, then you've probably had acute exposure within the last 2 months to 9 weeks, according to the literature. Now, if you go to a endocrinologist in the medical profession, they're going to think about doing an ACTH challenge, which is a different test. And that's where you're looking for disease processes of the adrenal glands. And most people that have adrenal dysfunction don't have a disease process going on, and they don't need a medical workup, but they certainly sometimes could. If a person has excessive urination, or if they've got problems with syncope where they're fainting, or if they've got problems with rashes or a moon face, or they've got all kinds of endocrine symptoms that I won't dive into here, but they've got metabolic problems that seem like thyroid. They've got other problems that might show up as heart pounding that often looks like thyroid. They might go to an endocrinologist for this test. And it's important to do if somebody's not gotten any answers. That's not usually where we start. So the next part of this explanation is the healing and root cause restoration of the problems of adrenal imbalance. And that is looking at what is the source of your stress. If somebody tells me that they have a lot of stress and their job is very stressful or their family life is very stressful, I will say to them, okay, when do you see the stress ending or reducing to a normal level? Because if they can see that within maybe 1 or 2 years or 1 or 2 weeks or months that it will end, they usually will do fine. And I will help them cope with it because I think that makes sense to help them cope with it. But if they don't have some kind of vision of this terrible stress going away, like, I'm Elon Musk and I run 4 companies and I kill myself all the time, I'm going to say, look, Elon, it's too much stress. You can't live this way. If you've got symptoms, and I'm not saying Elon has symptoms, but I'm using him as an example of some, world beating entrepreneur type. And if he comes to me and says, I've got these symptoms, I'm going to say, well, your body you're paying for your wealth with your health, and you're giving away layers of your health, and you might, die early or have other types of chronic medical problems that could come up and show up. It's not uncommon for people to start to get multiple autoimmune diseases. It's not uncommon for them to get other endocrine diseases. It's not uncommon for them to get insulin resistance and prediabetes to diabetes. There's a bunch of stuff that can happen to people if they get these problems and they don't take care of them. So if somebody is really working hard and they've got a very stressful life, they need to see an end to it. They need to have a vision that they can explain of when this will end. A lot of times it's a divorce, or it's a court case, or it's a job that's finishing, or a contract that's finishing. And they can see when it's going to end, and that helps them a lot. If they can't see when it's going to end, I always tell them, please talk to your family and your counselor and your priest or your rabbi or whoever you see, your Indian chief, and talk to them and see if they can help you see your way through coping with this until you can get through the stress and end. If they're in a domestic abuse situation, I really want to help them find some kind of help, because that's not okay. And they need to get some help. And the same goes for, suicide crisis syndrome. There are times that people have to work on these issues. They need to talk to a hotline. They need to talk to a professional. And there's a lot of metabolic hope and a lot of neurofeedback hope for those folks. And I want you to not lose hope. There are things we can do, and there is new research that is showing how powerful neurofeedback can be and these biochemical interventions can be. And we've got to get rid of the toxins. So let's just review for a minute what some of those things are that you're dealing with. We're looking at environmental stress and toxicity. Don't discount how important mold and glyphosate and other pesticides and herbicides, gasoline and fumes, the chemicals that are used in dry cleaning like perchlorate, looking at heavy metal toxicity, as I mentioned earlier with the hair. Those environmental stresses are a big deal. Also, don't forget food stresses. We have a lot of food stresses in our life that are food additives. Highly processed food is a serious stress on the adrenal glands. Inflammation and oxidative stress, being around lots of processed food, being around cigarette smoke, being around car exhaust and other automobile exhaust or industrial venting of that kind of smokestack stuff, the kind of air pollution that happens in parts of the world, that will affect your adrenal glands. Deficiency states, where you're deficient in a mineral or a vitamin or a fat or a protein. The macros, which is where you don't have your protein, fat, and carb ratios normalized. I tend to put people on a fairly high fat diet. Nearly half of their calories come from fat on a ketogenic diet, sometimes more. And carnivore diets are also very high fat diets, hopefully. Not just high protein, but high fat. There are insulin resistance problems where people are eating too many carbs and they end up having insulin resistance, where their blood sugar creeps up and their hemoglobin A1C gets high. That is completely reversible in most cases. There are eliminations and detoxes. There are elimination diets that we can use. There are all kinds of detoxes for each organ, and you want to talk to your clinician about what ones you want to do and what imaging you want to do. I like to do an ultrasound of the gallbladder before I do a bile or gallbladder cleanse first, because I don't want to have a gallstone get stuck and the person needs surgery. So sometimes it's really useful to go to your clinician and get a blood test or a ultrasound of your abdomen and see if you've got things like fatty liver, or if you've got fibrosis of the liver, or if you've got a gallstone. Those are very, very useful things. Keto and carnivore are very useful. In fact, they're my go-to tools for both children and adults. It works incredible for so many chronic conditions. There's just not a condition that keto and carnivore doesn't help. I mean, there's a couple of contraindications out there, but they're extremely rare. And so you just want to get your blood work checked and make sure that your blood work is in order. The main adrenal supplements that we can wrap up on that I tend to use a lot are vitamin B5 and magnesium and sodium, zinc, omega-3s. We need EPA and DHA, and we need antioxidants like N-acetylcysteine. NAC is a good antioxidant. So is glutathione. You can put these things on your skin. You can do rectal dosing through enemas. You can do retention enema. You can take it orally. There is injectable intravenous forms of these things. There's all kinds of ways to take them. There's nebulizers where you can nebulize them. That works extremely well, because when you take NAC or glutathione, it tends to want to go to your liver, and your liver hoovers it all up, and you don't get to distribute it to the rest of your body. Your skin doesn't get it. Your lungs don't get it. Your brain doesn't get it. Your heart doesn't get it. So you end up with your liver just getting all of that benefit. So that's why we like to put creams on. We like to do intravenous. We like to do the nebulizer, because that helps get the delivery to all of the organs of the body. As far as herbs go, I tend to use ashwagandha and Siberian ginseng. Be careful, because these are mild blood thinners. Sometimes people will get a nosebleed, and that nosebleed might be a sign that they've got too much ashwagandha or Siberian ginseng, or even quercetin can do that to people. I've gotten nosebleeds from these herbs myself, and I'm an O blood type, so sometimes that happens. Be careful, because different blood types have different tendencies to have reactions to these things. There is Panax ginseng, which is not Siberian ginseng. Panax ginseng is a very strong ginseng, and it's usually not used in large doses. It's usually mixed in with other formulas. So I would not get into very large doses of Panax ginseng. I would only have it as a mix in other things. It's used as a driver to drive other herbs, and it's quite a stimulant. So I would not use much Panax ginseng. Siberian ginseng is very safe, but Panax ginseng is a lot more of a wallop. German chamomile works great. Passion flower works great. Kava. Now, you shouldn't drive if you're taking kava generally. Kava can really give you quite a punch of relaxation. CBD works great for sleep and for stress and for antioxidants. It's a very good anti-inflammatory. There's a tremendous benefits of CBD. And then there's microdosing of mushrooms. The psychoactive mushrooms have been decriminalized in Denver. I'm coming to you live from Denver. Well, maybe not live for some of you, but coming to you from Denver where it's been decriminalized. So you'll see people doing microdose mushrooms in cases of all kinds of problems with mental illness and stress and addiction and PTSD. It's used in Tourette's. It's used in all kinds of things. It's even used in children because it's extremely safe. But that's another topic for another story. So that's been the discussion of all of our difficulties for having adrenal problems. Please understand that they're interwoven, especially in women. The adrenal hormones are interwoven with the sex hormones and the thyroid hormones. I didn't talk much about thyroid today, but please understand that that is all interwoven together. If you've got problems with one, you might have symptoms with the other, even if you don't have your labs reflecting that there is an abnormality, because many people can have an imbalance that doesn't show up on the laboratory. But it's nice to do these labs, and these labs can be very useful. There's hope for everybody. There's so much hope out there. I just wish I could show you how much I've seen and how many people get better and how much it can improve your life. So go to our website, check out humanconditionlab.com, and go to the YouTube channel. Thank you.